scientific skepticism and epistemological nihilism due to evolution. Some scientific fans of atheism are epistemological nihilists in order to present a little philosophical detachment or reflection about foreign policy criteria that benefit Americans rather than the globalist agenda. I will post a brief article on the logic of aggregating winning moves. In chess tactics, trainers at least, there does seem to be a best move. One's agenda might always be to choose the best, although there may be numerous equally valid best moves at various points in a game. Evaluating best moves options ought to be reflexive rather than possibilities within an agenda doomed to win, because it has a winning agenda ideal. If one opts for the end justifies the means agenda, then the means must have a sequence of best moves. If one justifies the ends or the winning in themselves, the aggregation of best moves must lead to a winning agenda, lest the moves with retrocausality be proven to be less than the best including losing. And I will add to that the means are the end in itself as time moves along in the present. 6 Days of Creation in a Multiverse. Louis Berkhoff writes in his book Systematic Theology on page 165 of the Examen or the Work of Separate Days on the paradigm of the 6 days of creation. He interprets Genesis chapters 1 and 2 from a conservative perspective rather well. In fact, in his evaluations of the opinions of various scholars that have taken different approaches to finding alternative meanings for the days in Genesis with extended time periods is helpful. Some scholars have taken the days of Genesis to represent geological epochs, and I have considered that myself. Yet it is not necessary to regard the first reasonable alternative meaning for the days of Genesis as the gospel truth, even if they may be found to be not in conflict with Scripture. Language has an intrinsic capability for permitting several possible meanings, unlike arithmetic expressions that have a single sum in regard to the numbers. Much of the conservative approach centers on the meaning of the Hebrew word for day, yom. Berkhoff writes on page 166, quote, "It must be admitted that the Hebrew word yom does not always denote a period of 24 hours in Scripture, and is not always used in the same sense even in the narrative of creation. It may mean daylight in distinction from darkness, Genesis 1:5, 16, 18, daylight and darkness together, Genesis 1:5, 8, 13, etc., the 6 days taken together, Genesis 2:4, and an indefinite period marked in its entire length by some characteristic feature, as trouble, Psalm 21, wrath, Job 20:28, prosperity, Ecclesiastes 7:14, or salvation, 2 Corinthians 6:2, unquote. It is difficult to find a particular value for the meaning of yom in Genesis that would be exhaustive and exclusive of other possible meanings in natural science today. God is eternal and time periods are temporal. The nature of what time really is isn't actually known. There may actually be a fifth force of nature. It was reported recently that is very small and could be the dark energy of the universe. Time is considered to be a relationship of matter, energy, and change that is observed. Max Tegmark noted that in the multiverse, my recapitulation of a point made in the mathematical universe of a level 4 multiverse, that it could be that consciousness passes through a static pre-existing field where all things past, present, and future always exist in consciousness, and consciousness, I've lost my place, experiences the passage as time. If God is unchanging and eternal, every possible multiverse that could exist in every form may exist eternally too, my point. Eternal God might have a different criterion for temporal space-time than can be presently understood of humanity. If one takes the 6 days of creation as a basic paradigm for God's creation or endowment to the universe for others, human beings, explained to mankind, then the description of Genesis may be consistent with an evolving universe as it is observed by humanity, with science that is in itself a nominal stage within the eternal and omnipotent being of God. Contemporary cosmology has speculated that the size of the universe adjusted for early hyperinflation may be 10 billion trillion light years rather than the much smaller approximate 100 billion light years of the observable universe. Whatever the size of a universe that may exist within the context of an infinite multiverse is, the field itself, a Higgs field that lets solid-state forms of energy exist as mass, could be itself embedded in a field within a field within a field with infinite regress. There are secularists that theorize creation out of nothingness can be achieved naturally from virtual particles emanating from the Higgs field for an instant before disappearing. As a source for the singularity and of all the energy and mass of the universe, virtual particles cascading into being in a vacuum would need to aggregate and then form a singularity before exploding and inflating. If the field from which virtual particles formed and hasn't changed, it is a paradox that the existing mass clumps in the universe, such as stars and planets, don't attract additional cascades of virtual particles in a multitude of singularities and Big Bangs, at least more often than every 13.7 billion years. Virtual particles may be fluctuations of the Higgs field rather than that of an absolute vacuum that may not exist in any case, a logical irony. The vacuum energy may not be infinite, however. Instead, it may exist as a form of energy also within the Higgs field endowment. And virtual particles are thought to be possibly brief actualizations of a field of an individual particle wave. Its energy is simply of a form that it allows itself to appear in several places at once, and is composite. So, if the virtual energy of the universe, if the universe were to have come together from virtual particles coalescing to start with, it would have had to have been that there was an initial force rather than just virtual particles from nothing. Virtual particles are themselves from something. Virtual particles might have come from a singularity, possibly, and then in that sense been somewhat like Stephen Hawking's black holes, with Hawking radiation emitting from it being the virtual particles. Yet that description is rather incomplete and unsatisfactory. The entire universe or multiverse may exist within a greater field pre-existing the singularity. It seems to me a little churlish to get too insistent about how God actually worked the first light of the universe on technical points, or to what he was actually referring. It is a beautiful paradigm that is probably true at several levels. Uncertainty exists in the world of physics, and that of knowledge, and is reciprocal, with space-time being nothingness in intervals with the certainty of probability. Theologians may benefit from the certainty of uncertainty too. Faith in God is the best certainty anyone can have, and the truth of Scripture minus the uncertainty of interpretation.